sorry. So the decisions that you are making in this particular section may be that we don't have the appropriate data, but we're going to meet back in the springtime so that we can determine closer to the summer break, if that's when ESY would be provided, what does our data tell us about this child? And is ESY services necessary for FAPE? Okay. It also in that particular one, so you guys are getting ready to do several annual IEPs at this time, but that second box there is then talking about what are the goals and objectives we're actually going to work on an extended school year program. So we'll go through why that you mark out what objectives and goals that there are versus just serving the whole IEP. And then also what happens when we determine it's not effective. So just checking this box doesn't end our conversation or what we need to do, but it's one of the spaces that you would document your information. So always, if you're going to meet again, you would want to get, we're going to meet in March of 2016, so if the IEP was last fall. When will it be? And make sure that's in your PR01, that we're going to come back in the spring to discuss ESY. Okay? Because at any time, it may be actually you're meeting next week and talking about ESY, and the team decides that there is not a need for it. But next, in May, parents request ESY. Okay? So you have to come back, have an IEP meeting, and consider their request and looking at the data. Is there some new data that weighs the team one way or the other from your previous decision that you made with that? Okay? But at least annually, this is things that you are talking about within the IEP. Okay. So laying out under IDA and under our state rules is children are able to have extended school year services if they need it for FAPE, okay? But again, the key things I kind of underlined for you or highlighted that come out of these legal definitions for it is the IEP determines on an individual basis, okay? So you take child by child in their situation year by year, and do they need extended school year services? And the big thing is for provision of FAPE, and we're going to dive into these each a little bit differently, okay? So in Ohio, every state has a different kind of analysis for determining ESY. The federal government doesn't lay out any one rule, but in Ohio we use regression and recoupment, okay? So these are the things that we're considering as teams when we're looking at our data and looking at the child individually. Okay. Do they need ESY to prevent significant regression? So we'll talk about how do we determine what's significant regression? Okay. That regression that's going to seriously impede their progress toward their goals. Okay. And, so big circle around the two things there. And whether the ESY services are necessary to avoid something more than adequately recoupable regression. Okay. So if we don't do this, there's going to be some harm done to the child because the time to recoup what was lost over whether it's Christmas break, spring break, or summer break, it will take way too long to recoup those skills, and it will jeopardize them. So therefore, ESY is applicable. So this is where it derives from, and this is on the one side of your page. At the bottom of that page is our guidance from the Ohio Department of Education, Office of Exceptional Children. Oftentimes, this is on the ODE website under Special Ed. They will take certain sections and kind of put them into more of our layman's terms outside of the legalese. And so these are the two areas that talk about, again, just reiterating the purpose of ESY and a reminder that it's just not particular categories of children identifications that always qualify or don't qualify for ESY, and reminder of the types of services that we have. We still have to consider a continuum of services when we're talking about ESY, just as you would during the school year. Okay, and we'll talk about how that looks a little bit different. Okay, so on the back of your page, then you have the law and the guidance on the front page. The back side is we're just going to walk through kind of those beginning stages. First of all, what is the purpose? But then we're going to get into how do you make those decisions? What are the things to think about? So use this as your scratch pad as you go through it. Okay. So again, the purpose of that is for FAPE. Okay. So for FAPE, this again, the big things are based on individual needs of the kid, and not just based on the disability category. The other big thing with FAPE and extended school year services is they're not designed to maximize the child's educational opportunities. Okay? They're there and provided because of the jeopardy that will happen because they cannot recoup what they've lost in a adequate amount of time. Okay, we've all heard of the summer slide. All of our kids, no matter disability or not, lose some of the skills that they were taught the previous year. Okay, that's why the first part of every school year is spent in somewhat of a review mode to get kids back up where they're going. Okay, the same thing is true of our students with disabilities. Okay, the skills that we were working on, they're going to regress some minutes. But what does our data tell us about how long it's taking them to recoup that skill? Okay, is it longer than, and it's jeopardizing what we can go on to than if we did not provide it? Okay, so we have to provide it, otherwise we have this, we're spending, two grading quarters trying to recoup what we left off in May with. So it's what does our data tell us, and we'll dig into that a little bit too. Okay. ESY is also just not sometime in the summer. So ESY can be considered things that you do before school or after school. It could be things that you are doing during summer break or winter break or spring break as well. Those would all be considered extended school year services because typically they have the 184 days, 184 or 5 days of school that are required, and that's when you provide all their services. So anything outside of that is considered an extended school year. So then we move it into the definition of what is ESY. And it's really about the prevention of significant regression. Okay, you're not going to find a black and white definition of what is significant regression. How many of you work with students who are alternately assessed? Okay. There's no black and white decision there either about a marker of whether we decide is a child going to be alternately assessed. We have a lot of kids that sit on the bubble when we make those decisions, and it all comes back to the data. And what does our data tell us about whether one assessment is more appropriate than another assessment? Because they talk about significant needs there as well, is what is significant regression? Okay? So we need to know how long it takes generally to recoup skills lost. Okay? Not only of our typical kids, but our students with disabilities as well. Because sometimes they're going to have a different time it takes to recoup them. Maybe it's a couple more weeks, but it's not going to jeopardize them than it's Christmas, and we're still trying to recoup something that we learned last May. Okay? But we're not going to know that without any data, and which runs right into the adequately recoupable. Okay? And then the big difference between ESY and summer school. Okay? So the difference between the ESY and summer school is the summer school is a program to cover all academics, or maybe just focus on reading, or maybe focus on the area of math. But ESY is focused on that child's skills and their disabilities and things that you were doing during the year with the IEP. You're just extending the opportunities for them to work on those same skills. Okay? So by chance, in summer school, if they're in a reading program, they may be, if they had a decoding goal, they may be working on it. So it's just part of that. But that's not ESY. Unless you say the child has to have this, if they don't attend this, and they have to work on this skill, or otherwise we're going to have a regression and loss, we can't recoup this in time, that would be considered your ESY. So any child, just because they're put into a summer program, doesn't automatically mean it's ESY. So you always have to look at the child first as a gen ed kid. So is this a kid that qualifies for summer summer school. And they may, but do you also need to make sure you are doing SDI in the summer while they're at their summer reading program? Do you have to make sure you're doing IEP progress reports while they're in summer school? So if it's ESY, the answer is yes. You have to be providing the SDI and doing the progress reporting with it. So that's why there's a distinction between the two types of things that your kids may be within. Okay? All right, so how do you determine eligibility? And the first thing is really, it will always come back to anything in special ed. Whether we have the evidence to say yes or no to it is our collection of data. Okay. Many districts get into a quandary this time of year because they have a lot of requests for ESY, but they don't have the data to really tell parents why the child doesn't qualify for ESY. They truly know in their gut they don't qualify for ESY, but there's no quantifiable data to show what happens to the child during breaks or what has happened with their progress all along this year. So they find themselves backed into a corner. So this is really where your data collection is critical. So when do we collect data? First day of school, start collecting data on the child. Okay? Not only just during breaks, but you guys are collecting data anyway through your IEPs and your progress reports. So by doing that, what you're seeing is ongoing progress, and you're going to be able to see just why they're in school with you, what is their rate of progress, what is their rate of learning anyway. Some children have a lot slower rate. It takes them a lot longer to learn a skill than others. But it will go in tune with you guys taking data collection over breaks, okay? So they recommend for taking collection over breaks is that you take some data samples, like a pre-sample of the skills that you're looking at, a couple days, and then a couple days after they return from break. So why wouldn't we take pre-test or post-test data the day they're leaving and the day they come back? A little louder. To see if they regress. So why don't we do it? Okay, it's Friday of Christmas break. Why aren't we probably taking new data sets? I checked out. Okay, it's craziness, right? No matter what break it is, it's hard to do it. So that's why it's recommended to look at a couple days before you know a break is coming up, and let's take some data sets then, and let's wait till they get back in the routine a couple days, and let's do some follow-up and get some post data to see where they are with it. Some kids, you'll see regression over the weekend. Some kids, you might see some over the 2 weeks, and you might not. But those are all good data points to coming to this time of the year and determining what was the rate of loss. Okay, so even if they did some stuff over Christmas, we then need to know how long it took them to get that back. Okay, so that's not your only data point on that skill set. You're going to want some data and evidence pieces on how much you had to work on that particular skill to get it back to where you were prior to that break. Because that tells you how fast they can recoup it. Okay. You're going to see the biggest difference over summer break. You have a lot longer of time for them to lose it. Okay. So it's going to be acceptable over summer break that it takes them a little longer to recoup what they lost just because they've been gone so long. But when is it too much? Okay. So when have you not been able to move on to anything new because we're still teaching an old skill that they had when they left us in May? Okay. All right, so for the that's when you do it, anytime that there is particular breaks. And this is for all children. Now you will have children that you know I need to be collecting a little bit more data on all the time. Okay, these are scenarios that possibly the child's not showing progress this year in this area, so let's make sure we're collecting it. But even your kids who always fairly seem to do very well, something can happen. So then you want to just pick up on the data in that respect and when kids are starting to regress a little bit, even during the year. Okay. All right. You also want to be taking data during the ESY program. So say if it's a summer program that they're going to be doing ESY, whether it's the teacher going to the home and providing it or it's somewhere here at the school district, is taking pre-assessment data of the skills and then post-assessment data when the programming is done. So whenever the number of hours provided is done for ESY, you want some post data. And the reason for that is twofold. Is number one, you want to see if the child has progressed. But number two, you want to see the effectiveness overall of the programming that was provided to them. Okay? Was it effective for the child to only receive 1 hour a week? Okay? These will help in future discussions that you guys are having. Okay, and then reporting is you have to make sure that you're reporting on progress through the IEP as well. So when they're getting extended school year services, if it's in the summer, obviously it's a lot longer period of time, and then you report that information. It just becomes part of their IEP. So just like all other progress reporting does when you're doing annual IEPs, you know, what happened over the summer. And also in the collection of the data, the data really is important in what are your evidence pieces. So how are you collecting data? Just like if we talk about progress reports, all the evidence pieces that you're collecting, you should be able to pull out and give to anybody who asks for them. So if you say I'm doing it via a rubric or a checklist, same things here. What are your evidence pieces for monitoring their progress when they're getting services through ESY? Okay, charting that data. So truly, the process is no different than what you're doing all year. It's just going to be in a concentrated time at what you're looking at. Okay. All right, then we move into, so you have all your data sources. So you're getting ready to come up to these meetings. And so what's really, really critical is that everybody has this data. So that there's just one keeper of the data when you come to this meeting. And we're all talking about ESY. Does this child qualify? It's great for everybody to have a look at that ahead of time, including parents as well. So you can kind of digest it a little bit, and we can have a conversation about what everybody's seeing. And also, on the collection of data, it shouldn't just be on one person's shoulders to collect the data. Okay? Throughout the year, that helps you make these decisions. Because again, you want to see how the child is doing, just like in IEP progress reporting, how are they doing in various settings with what we have taught them, these skills they need to generalize. You want to know that stuff when it comes to decisions about ESY, because you have to make decisions about what are the services they actually get in the summer. They don't have to look like, nor do they probably most likely look the exact same thing that they were getting all year long. But we need data from therapists, we need data from general ed teachers, we need data from guidance counselors, whatever it is that we're looking at, you want to make sure you have multiple sources of data. And it's just not falling on that one person, which is easier to do in the school year if you're collecting that from the teachers as well to do your progress reports that you have. All right, then you move into your data analysis. So it's always important to be able to summarize the data. Just like if you're writing a progress report, you plot out all the data points. So you tell the parents, the guardians, this is what they got on these 4 occasions, 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, or whatever skill that you're working on. You summarize that information, but the key thing is here you have to interpret it then. Okay, what does it mean? Okay, we've collected this information pre-break, post-break, whether it's Christmas, whether it's Thanksgiving break, it's summer break, and what does it tell us? Okay. So even if a child is not getting ESY services over the summer, you want to take collection of data in the spring before they leave you, and you want some collection data when it comes back because it gives you a good data baseline set for what happens over summer with this child. So something to think about if that's not yet what you're doing with all of your children on those critical skills they're working on, okay? Within their IEP, gathering some pre-break data this summer before they leave you, and then the teacher obviously following up who has them that's rolling into that IEP for the fall. Where are they within that first couple of weeks on that skill? Okay, so you have really good baseline data. It's harder to get that when the kid's already been in ESY. but you still want to collect it. It doesn't show you the same amount of regression because they've had some type of service. Okay. All right, so when we're talking about regression and interpreting the data, it will come down to those things that you guys are looking at is what skills are we concentrating on? So it's really looking at not the overall IEP, because that's what you're doing when they're there with you for 6 to 7 hours per day, 180 plus days a year. These are the things we're working on. In 1 year, this is where we need them to be. Okay? But within that IEP, what are the critical things that could possibly impact them if we don't provide ESY? Okay, not everything in the IEP is critical for ESY. Okay, because through our federal laws and our state laws, we only provide services during school the time frame that our school calendars are set up. So ultimately, any child would benefit if we provide them services, any kid. General ed, special ed, students with 504s, students identified with ELL, economic disadvantage, they would all benefit if we went to year-round services. Okay? But we don't, and we don't have to do that. This is just something that we do for our students with disabilities because we say it's necessary for faith. Okay? Similar to a question that you will answer in the IEP about extracurriculars, is when we say it's necessary for faith, we make sure they have access to it. So what is necessary for a free and public appropriate education for them? Again, not maximizing their education and not making sure that they keep going with where they are. But if we don't do it, the regression that will happen in the student is so significant that we're not going to be able to recoup it in time to go on and really learn. We're basically taking so much of the next year to relearn this thing. So things that other things to consider would be, what are those things the child is, those critical skills that we're just emerging on, okay? It's May 15th, and oh my gosh, the kid is finally getting this one critical thing. And this is a huge skill set this child needs, okay? These are things that you can take into consideration. Maybe they haven't had a ton of regression in the past, okay? But we're emerging on something that if we don't continue this right now, we're going to lose a lot of ground, okay? Because some of our students with more significant disabilities do take a long time to progress in certain skills. So therefore, if we just interrupt that and we're on the breakthrough, then we're basically starting back over the next year with it, okay? So you really have to look at where the child is within the curriculum, where they are within those critical skill sets of things that are in the IEP that you're working on. And are you on the brink of something, a breakthrough with the child? Okay. Maybe in the past, we never showed regression with a child, but in that particular case, even though we don't have any regression, this is just such a critical area. Okay? That's going to be maybe few and far between the number of things that you have with that. And maybe you just have to depend where you are.
Can you give, I know when you and I talked about this, you gave the example of teaching a student to use a communication device. And can you give an example like that of where this might come into play?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a student with, in that example, using a communication device, they're finally, because a lot of utilizing that is you teaching them how to utilize it, how to use that as a communication tool so they have a response to you. Okay, so you are just finally there with that, whatever device they have, and then you're finding their response mode to you, so that they can then participate and show you what they know. If you're there in May, that's not something you want to cut off and then revisit back in September. Because more than likely, you are starting back over unless mom and dad, there's a lot of heavily involved outside services for this child that's going to continue on with these services. Okay? And those are things you look at. You look at the child as a whole. You look at their individual needs, but you look at outside what else is going on. Okay? So not just do we have regression in the past? We have it documented in the past, because you might not have it, okay? And we don't have anything about recruitment because there's never been regression in the past. Okay? So you may be on with a new child deciding these things. Okay? And we don't know if there has been past regression. Everybody has it, but what the true impact was. But we're on the brink of some new critical skill. We're on the brink of using some new communication device that will, allow the child to access their curriculum and progress at a faster rate. Okay? And to cut those things off would significantly jeopardize where they are. Okay? You're going to take a lot of steps backwards from where they are. Okay? Some of the other things, obviously, you do consider the severity of the disability. But how is that impacting them educationally? Okay? Not just because they fall under the category of MD or autism, but what about the disability is preventing them from progressing at a adequate rate of progress? Okay? So you have to know what is that student's adequate rate of progress. So when we started New Skill, and you guys are doing arts there, right? And that's the kind of same kind of thing you're looking at for children in RTI when you're looking within that time frame is how long is it taking for them to show growth? Okay, where do we need them to be to show that they are making growth and eventually they're going to get to where their peers are? In the same respect as what you're looking at through the IEP progress reporting is what is your data telling you? So can you chart it and can you see that the child has flatlined all year? Or can you see that it has taken 2 months, but we're making progress? And the next 2 months, we're making some. Where you have other kids who their trajectory line is, 45 degrees. Others are pretty close to, 15 degrees. Where are they at? But the question will be, with that, is you don't qualify for ESY just because you're not making progress on your IEP goals. Because what should happen is when you're making your progress reporting through the annual IEP, so at least quarterly you're doing it, possibly more often, if there's a trend that the child is not progressing, then that is a trigger for the school district to come back together and have an IEP meeting. Okay? Because if we're not progressing, then something needs to change. Okay? We either have the wrong skill set we're working on, we have the wrong SDI, or we have the wrong amount of time. Okay, so those things need to be addressed during the school year. Okay? And it's not a reason that you want to address those. Okay? And once you address that, the child should begin to make additional progress in whatever you've decided to do. But just because they didn't meet it, they're not mastered yet when it comes to whatever your last day of school is, doesn't mean that that's not an automatic qualifier for ESY either. Because that's a year-long IEP. Okay, so you have to look at it in respects of when did that IEP start, when summer comes about, or a big break, okay? And how long do we have to get to that annual goal with it? And sometimes behaviorally, those are the things that you need to look at as well in those other considerations that just because a child doesn't act the same at home as they act here, because of more structure, again, doesn't automatically qualify them for ESY services. But if it substantially impacts them not to have the continued SDI, the continued therapy that you're providing them in the structure, which will impact them and make them regress even more in their academics, then that's a consideration the team has to have for ESY. And really, these two things here, regression and recruitment. Like I said, I can't give you a black and white answer that this is when you know you hit regression or this is when you hit recruitment. But I'm telling you, if you collect the data will speak for itself. Okay? So it will come back to, are we collecting, how are we using our progress reports that we are accumulating during the year? Whether it's we have to look to the past one because we just got a new annual one, say last month. So we have to really look how were they doing last year with the progress reports. If they were in a program last year, had services in the summer, what was their progress? What was the effect of it? What did it do for the child? collecting data about how long it takes a child to recruit. Okay? So we know that all children lose skills. So what are your data sources right now for collecting for all of your students with disabilities on where they are when they come back to school? With those, obviously you're looking for the stuff in the IEP, where are they? And how long is it possibly taking them to get back up to where they were? So if they were at 60% mastery with it when they left in June, and when you test them in September with that same skill, and they're at, say, 40%, okay, what's our follow-up when we do the next progress report? How much do they come back to where they were, okay, and whether that is recoupable. All the literature, if you look at it for our students, just students in general, students without disabilities, I mean, it takes them a good 6 weeks or so sometimes to get back in the swing and relearn, remember everything that they were taught last year, and refresh their memories. Which is one of the whole discussions around year-round school, is that we spend so much time reteaching what we taught last year. But I'm sure we're nowhere near year-round school. So these are those conversations that you have around that. And this is hard for parents as well to hear, but just because you had ESY before doesn't mean it's an automatic qualifier for every single year that you're in school. Okay. So if a child has had ESY for many, many years, okay, your data is very, very critical. And the more data you can collect, the better it will help in making these decisions, and that you know you've made the right decision as a team. Okay. So even if parents don't agree, it's hard to say that they don't need it when we don't have data to support why we're saying that they don't need it. Okay? So you've gone through this, you've looked at the data sources, and you say, yes, ESY is what they need. Okay? So how do we determine what do they work on, what is the length of time, do they get related services, and what's their LRE? So if we go back to that first page, or the section 10 of the IEP, one of the boxes that you mark off and check after you say that we're yes, ESY, and we're going to provide that, is what are the goals and objectives, benchmarks necessary for ESY, okay? So qualifying for ESY doesn't qualify for all the services they have, okay? You're, as a team, looking at what are the critical things that if we don't work on, that we will have to take, the recruitment period is too long. It seems so significant that it's going to cause impact them in other aspects with that. So you look to those goals, okay, or objectives, okay? They don't get all the SDI that's in section 7. They don't get all the goals, okay? Because remember, those are year-long goals that you're working on, no matter where they are in the cycle when summer comes around or Christmas break comes around. But what are the critical things that your data is telling you that either we know from our data is there, or our data doesn't show that there is any past regression, but the child does have a very slow rate of learning and we're on the brink of something, okay? And if we don't, this is such a critical thing, if we don't continue it, then the harm that would be caused coming back is too significant. Okay? So that's why you determine which one of those particular ones does that child need. Okay? It could be a couple, it could be one. Yeah.
So if parent wants ESY, if there is not a goal and objectives on that student side of the team, should we even be addressing that in ESY?
If they have no goals,
Yes, let's just,
you mean no goals in the IEP or just no goals on the ESY?
no goals in the IEP, for example, science. We really don't write goals and objectives for science, and therefore they would not qualify for any sort of regression in science. However, we will have reading, writing, and math. So that is anything that would qualify.
Right. Whatever is based upon their needs. Okay? Just and happen in science and social studies through math, things that happen in math, or through the writing aspect of that. Now, if they're struggling in science, maybe they qualify for the summer program in science, just as a student. But you don't write new goals.
I'm just saying that, services that we might get in a science classroom to help the child,
Say you're in a co-taught setting.
yeah,
Okay.
and they cannot function independently. There's a lot of companies that could do it, and could be for top extension center. English. We can't do things independently. I guess I'm just wondering how you would address that in ESY. If they're not doing anything independently, I think that's what it's down to. And they can't do it at any point in the day.
I would imagine they probably have a social emotional goal or adaptive behavior goal that's addressing them being able to do things independently. Some type of behavior. You have to go off what's already in the IEP, so not knowing a particular instance. Yes, they may need hand-over-hand assistance, or they may always need one-on-one support. Okay? And they may need that in ESY, but it's through whatever you're working on, okay? Through a goal. So you're not writing a science goal. That's not one of the things that's promoted to write a goal in science. But say that you're working on multi-step problems in math, okay? That applies to science, okay? And they need to have whatever, hand-over-hand assistance, okay? Those services, you have to decide what of the services go along with ESY. What do they need? So you may have hand-over-hand assistance in that case, if the child cannot independently do that anything. They need that. So that's one of the services that we make sure that it is with it, okay? This particular child might also have speech therapy. But is speech therapy necessary for ESY? So everything whatever's written in section 7 doesn't automatically transfer to what you do in ESY. And this is an example, the same kind of thought process that should be happening when we're talking about home instruction. So a child, for whatever reason, now needs to be on home instruction, whether it's due to discipline, a medical reason. The team should gather together and determine how much time do they need to meet their IEP goals, okay? And so, again, we're coming back to, we're only talking about a certain number of goals now. We're not talking about the child's whole IEP. We're only talking about a couple of number of things that we said without services through ESY, the child will not receive FAPE. Okay, so which one of the goals and objectives are we working on, and how much time is needed for that? Okay? So you have to think about how much time do we provide on that particular goal, too. And there's no one way to figure it out. There's no calculator, unfortunately, to stick it all in and figure out how much of the time that we determine that is. It is your educational profession judgment to decide that. So if I look at section 7, and during the year, I provide STI for this particular, in the area of decoding, 10 minutes a day. Okay. Do they need 10 minutes a day every day of the summer to ensure there's no regression? Okay. It's not the same conversation as what we do every day because they're physically with us every single day. But what are we doing to make sure there's not a regression? Maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, okay? The other things to think about when you talk about the timing of it is if, perchance, that you would have a program that they're going into that lasts 4 weeks, okay? And that their SDI in this program, so it's a summer reading program, okay? Within that summer reading program, you're also going to provide their SDI that's required in the ESY, okay?
Hey Kelly, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
One of the things you guys with our attorney, we've kind of talked to our attorney about a couple of cases. One of the things that she has asked us is, is the child making progress? If the child makes progress in ESY, then we went way above and beyond. If want it to be adequately recoupable, what's in the legal world, they compare that to what a typical child would regress, and is it going to take us even way longer than that to regain these skills? If it's not, then some regression is okay. Some regression is appropriate because every child has some level of regression. So I think we have for a long time looked at progress and maintenance when it's really legally, I guess I'm thinking about this defensible in court stuff. That's not what they're looking at. So we have definitely given above and beyond, we know that, and it's not like you can just pull that away and say, we're not doing this because our parents would have a fit. But when you're thinking about these things, if you're thinking this is going to make this child make progress, then it's probably not, ESY is not necessary. Go ahead.
Should the data be taken with the same type of instruction?
You can also look at your progress report for data. When you see a student that continues to make progress all year long, despite breaks, despite anything else, then that's a student that may not qualify for ESY because they're continuing to make progress. That's what we're looking at.
And I think that's looking at when you guys are, it would be a great practice to start when your kids are leaving school to take some pre-summer break data, because that's their longest one, and when they come back. But you're also the teacher who will be taking on that IEP. It'd be nice to have some post-break, summer break data within the first week or so to see where they are. But you're also ultimately, at least in the first 9 weeks, you're going to see where the child is with that skill too, because you're still generally on the same IEP. So that's good evidence to say, hey, we're back to where we were the time before. So it was recoupable, because generally the first 9 weeks, the first 6 weeks for a typical child is where we expect them to finally be back where we left them when they went on a summer break. So that first IEP progress report will be very critical in your telling as well of where they are, even if you can't get the data right away. So it would be great if you can get some data right as they enter back in school, plus at least you have that first 9 weeks to see if we're close to where we were before, or we're still a long way away. Okay? And so for a student with disability, that means this is significant. We can't even recoup it in the time it took us. And Sarah had a really good point of the difference of what we had talked about before is not, it's just to ensure that they have faith. So it's not to give them additional educational opportunities to have summer tutoring that every child would benefit from if we did that. But are we preventing significant regression? Some regression is okay, because every child has regression. Are we going there? So that's what, yes, sir.
So what Sarah was saying, she's comparing it to the typical student. Do we also need to collect some data on typical students to show what typical regression is so we can define that?
Yeah, Dave, that was actually the suggestion our attorney had, was to talk with gen ed teachers and say, if I'm teaching a co-taught English class, say, at the high school, and what is the, and they can tell you, because I know I've been teaching and learning, they would say I need to spend the first, 6-7 weeks doing review. They know, a lot of them will know right off the top of their head, but I would have a conversation with your gen ed teachers. Well, some of you know, you're sitting in co-taught classrooms and you're working with them, and it's not that we're saying that we expect this child to be on track with gen ed students. They may be working, for some of you, on the extended standards, they may be working on very different skills. Even if those skills are different, if it only takes them 6 weeks to recoup those skills, that may look very different than what gen ed students are doing, that's still an okay amount of regression, because that's typical, that's normal for all kids.
So if you're going to give a few kids a test before Christmas and after Christmas, should you include a few typical students so you can see what that regression rate really looks like, or are they?
Sure, I don't think, yeah, it would absolutely not hurt, it would help, for sure.
I mean, you would have to, if you're doing a pre-assessment, if you're looking at particular skills, it would depend on how close they are to grade level when you're doing that, yeah, right, doing some things like that. But, I mean, the research, it is great to have your own, I mean, the research would say 6 to 9 weeks. So if you're in somewhere in that area, it's not telling it takes our students without disabilities to come back and get their brain unfoggy from the summer and remember what we were all talking about the previous year and why we spend so much time reteaching. So when you look at that length of time, this will be again, and to go back to what Sarah was speaking to, is what is necessary to make sure we don't have a significant regression. So if we did every single day during the school year, that doesn't mean that's what we do in the summer, okay? Because we expect that there's going to be some slide. We're just trying to prevent a huge slide from that. And then how often, we do have to think about, and what I started to mention was that if you have a summer program, so you have, a lot of schools have summer reading programs that their kids come into, or summer math program, that you can provide services during that time. So they're doing the summer school reading program in addition to you're doing some SDI related to what you said was necessary in ESY. But you have to think about, for each child individually, that summer reading program may be 4 or 6 weeks at most. And does this child need some ongoing educational time with their individual specialist or therapist throughout the summer? So you can never limit ESY to when a district has certain types of programs. So you have to determine, is it best that the student gets 20 minutes every week or every other week for all summer, because you have the contact that that child needs throughout? Or is it okay for that child that if we just do a concentrated SDI time during the summer reading program, they're going to be okay? Because you have to remember there's a break between the program and when they come back to school, which is for some other programs is another 4 to 5 weeks, which is still a big chunk of time with it. So those are some considerations, and why when you're looking at them individually, it's important to show that you have done that. So have we thought about, when we say we're only going to do it during this programming time, what the consequences to that child could be if we're not having some ongoing support with them on the other weeks? So some kids are fine, and some kids you won't benefit from that at all. Okay? Same thing with related services. They may or may not need the related service that they are getting while they're in school. Okay? Again, is it needed to prevent substantial, significant regression? Maybe they only need the service of the IS to continue to work on decoding or multi-step problems. But they don't need the OT to work with them, okay, to make sure that goal. So again, it's always going to go back to what goals do you choose for the child, and or what objectives are you choosing to work on, and what is necessary to ensure that you are maintaining where they are with only a little regression that they would have, because you're not going to be with them every day. And then the other consideration would be the LRE. Okay, so the district has to offer an LRE to their students. So even if you don't have it, and I know this might not be a decision that you guys make, but it's a conversation you're having with parents as well when we're determining what are the ESY services. Number one is, what is Perrysburg's ESY continuum for our students with disabilities? Do we do everything in-house, or are certain things contracted out? Because it's perfectly okay that we don't have a summer occupational therapist. Okay, we don't employ one. But if the child needs it based on the goals that we wrote and said that they are going to be working on, those can be contracted out for somebody else. Okay? But you still have to have a continuum. Okay? And if you don't have the program, you don't have to invent the program, but you have to find where the child can get those services. And again, that's your supervisors and administrators. But those questions for you, if you're not sure of what is our continuum of services we have to offer, those are the questions that you want to ask as you're getting ready to go into this. So obviously you're coming in on crunch time for this year. Okay? So number one is to revisit all the data that you have. And everybody who's coming to the table, do they have access to the data so you don't feel like you're shouldering it when you go into the meeting about what has been happening in the past for the IEP progress? Where were they? Because you can definitely take and look at their last year IEP, what was their last IEP progress report, and then where were they when they came back that first 9 weeks. That's one good source of data, even if nothing else was collected. That shows you over a big break. But then, more importantly too, as you think about through next year, what are the ways that you can discover to collect evidence in maybe a new way for next year for the kids that will be coming into your program? Okay? how are you going to keep track of that information? If you want to discover, as you had suggested, what is our general ed students doing beyond talking to our teachers, especially your students in the co-taught setting. If the skills that you're going to be working on, you can test, see where the kids are, but your general ed teachers will probably be your best friends in this particular respect. They can tell you how long it takes them generally to get back on track as they come in the fall with that. Okay? So the big takeaways for you is just remembering that data will drive your decisions, and the more data that you have, it still might not be an easy decision, and it may not be an easy thing to explain why a child may not qualify for ESY. But legally defensible, as Sarah said, you have the data to back you up why, right? Even if they've had it in the past. And then really diving into looking at, if we say there are certain skills that we're not going to be able to recoup, significantly would jeopardize them in the regression more than other children, we're going to work on what goals and objectives are we working on. Limit that to what is critical. Not every single one of them is likely to fall into the regression or recruitment and hit all those indicators. And then thinking through what is the amount of time necessary, as Sarah had pointed out, is there's going to be some regression, but we need to make sure that it's not so significant that we're still at Christmas time working on the skills they lost over the summer. Sarah, Amy, or Andrea, anything else you would like to?
Oh, yeah, well, Dave, I just wanted to touch quick, you had mentioned about the assessment. So if you're giving an assessment, I wouldn't, if it's like a modified assessment, or I wouldn't give that to, just to kind of clarify what I mean, I wouldn't necessarily give that to gen ed students, but I would, if you're already giving them an assessment, I think it would be helpful to look at their performance and regression and those types of things. So, but I don't know that I would actually give, I think someone had said that, I just don't know why it doesn't make sense to give that to a gen ed student. And I think the other piece is we looked for a long time at this as like a gap closing, so we have parents say to us that they're not behind, so this will give them kind of like that booster shot. And again, that's not really the intent, it's not to close gaps, it's not to supplement, it's not to give in addition to. We'd love to be able to do that, but that's not the purpose of it. So it'll be a struggle a little bit, some conversations we're going to have.
These parents have other, whether every child someone qualifies for summer school here or not can be an option, or just the ability. I think also looking into, and this is something you guys may do already, is in your community or close by, what access do parents have to making sure just continuing on the educational benefits of their child, for any child. So what does the library have? What does the local university have that any child can participate in if they want their child to just be continually be enriched over the summer, that some children don't have the opportunity to do as they go forward.
And I would say if you guys are having ESY meetings and you're not sure how it's going to go, you're talking about an IEP, just invite myself or Andrew or Amy. If you just want another person there for support and to kind of talk that through with parents. So I know there's some that are already going to. So.
And the last thing I just want to make sure to remind you of the PR1 is to include in the PR1 that obviously that was a discussion that happened about ESY. But if you're marking the child doesn't qualify, you want to say why. Okay, and why goes back to your data. So it's the same thing if a child was being referred for special education and the district doesn't suspect a disability, you send a PR1 that says we don't suspect a disability, but the important part is the why. The why is the data. What does the data support why we're not doing something with it? So those are always the follow-up things that you'll do in your PR1, whether it's within the annual IEP or it's a separate meeting that you're having. Does anyone have any last-minute questions? Okay, I will put my information up here, but obviously your supervisors are your first go-to, your directors for those questions, and the obviously Color office at any time. There's a lot of good resources on OD's website too. I've been there for the last. All right, thank you very much for your time.